Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today we have the second installment of my state ranking video complete with book recommendations. So in my last video we went through states 26 through 50. So today we're going to start with my 25th state. We are moving up in the world here. Now again, just because these states made it to the top half doesn't mean that they are the best states in the country. It's just based on my personal experience with each of them and the memories that I have of them, etc. So, beginning with state number 25. I have Rhode Island in this list. And Rhode Island is famous for its fall foliage. This is one of the states that I really want to go back to and see more of because I don't have very distinct personal memories of it. But I do remember fall foliage, and I remember being on kind of a rocky coast there in Rhode Island. And for some reason, that makes me think of Anne of Windy Poplars, just kind of that setting, and also Anne's House of Dreams, because they're set in Canada, but particularly Anne's House of Dreams there's that rocky coast there that she's on with lighthouses and stuff, and it evokes that very similar feeling. So it's not set in the same area, but it kind of evokes the same sort of setting. So those are the book recommendations I have for Rhode Island. And we've got a lot of New England states going on here. So the next one is Connecticut. And Connecticut is another I want to see more of. When we went up to Massachusetts, the last time we took the train, and the train went by the Long Island Sound and everything, and it just looks so beautiful. I wanted to stop and see there. My other memories of Connecticut are that in the winter and being very cold. I do, however, have a couple of book recommendations not related to any of that, but that are set in or about Connecticut, sort of. One is a Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain, which I read a long time ago, and I remember it being very funny. And Mark Twain is generally very funny, but also very pithy at the same time. And I think I would like to read it as an adult because I think it would be even more interesting as an adult. Well, I guess I read it, I was a young adult the last time I read it, but I would like to read it again. I think I would probably understand more of what he's trying to say in the book and not just the humor of it. And then The Moffatts by Eleanor Estes. It's one of my favorite series when I was a child, and it's set in Connecticut. And it's just a beautiful picture of small town family life in New England. And then number 23 is New Hampshire. Like I said, a lot of New England states here, right in a bunch. White Mountain is in New Hampshire, and I am old enough that when we went there when I was young, we saw the Man on the Mountain, which has since fallen off. It was like eroded. So it's not there anymore, but I vividly remember it. And I remember driving up White Mountain. I remember that being a little scary. So The Man on the Mountain is no longer there. So my book recommendation is by an author who is no longer writing, but the memory of her books lives with me quite vividly. I loved her books, and I wish that she had written more, and that is Lynn Nichols. What are the titles? I'll put some pictures up of some of the titles, but they're just really... Some of them are set in my area where I live, like in Virginia and other points south, I think. But they're just really compelling, emotional stories, but very, very well written. And I thoroughly enjoyed them. But she wrote like 4 or 5 books, and then I think maybe in the early 2000s, and has not written anything since. I don't know anything about her other than that, but I really enjoyed those books. And then number 22 is Maine, another New England one. And when I think of Maine, I think of lighthouses. There are so many lighthouses in Maine, and we went to some of them. And a book I think of is The Blackout Book Club by Amy Lynn Green, which is set in Maine during World War II. And it's interesting. I love how she sets her books on the home front in World War II. And so you really get to experience what it was like for Americans still in America, experiencing the war here, not directly involved, on the front, but still grappling with the effects of the war. And that I found very interesting. Also, The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Stedman, I believe, was a really good book that I thoroughly enjoyed. It's not set in Maine. It is set, I believe, in Australia or New Zealand, but it is about a lighthouse and a family that lives in a lighthouse. And so when I think lighthouses, I think of that book, and it's really good. It tackles some difficult questions, and it's a very gripping story. And then number 21 is Vermont. And when I think Vermont, I think of the Von Trapp family and The Sound of Music, and also maple syrup, and a lot of forests, also covered bridges. Vermont is one I want to go back to because those things I remember very vividly, and I want to experience them again as an adult. The book I want to recommend is the autobiography Maria by Maria Von Trapp, which gives you a clear picture of her life. The musical is a nice story, but it's not really 100% factually accurate. I mean, the basis of the story is, but there's a lot in it that was, you know, for the movie or for the musical. So it's really helpful to get the actual story of Maria von Trapp. And so I read that many years ago and really enjoyed it. And then number 20 is Arizona, only because of the Grand Canyon, which is amazing. Amazing and memorable. And I think of the Grand Canyon as being like something that was, you know, that was shaped, carved out of the earth and changed by significant amounts of water, and something impacted to form the Grand Canyon to make it what it is today. And so a book that has been very impactful for me is the Price of Privilege trilogy, which I have talked about before on this channel, so I won't say a lot about it, but that's by Jessica Dotta, and it's definitely one of the fiction books in my life that have had the most profound impact on me. And then number 19 is Pennsylvania, because there's a lot of history, particularly in the Philadelphia area, but also there's a history in all of the states. But as far as American history goes, there's a lot that you can do in Pennsylvania, and I love history, so historical sites. And then also Lancaster, where I just was the other day, and they have Sight and Sound there, which is a fantastic show, which I have already talked about, based on Bible stories. So there's a lot to love in Pennsylvania. The book that I want to mention is The Light Still Shines, which is a memoir written by the wife of the man who held hostage and then eventually murdered the children in the Amish schoolhouse some years back. And it was a profoundly moving memoir and a story of how God's grace can work in even the most tragic and difficult of circumstances. And that was set in Lancaster, in areas that I have been to and driven through. So very, very interesting book, and only read it if you want to cry, because you will cry. And then number 18 is West Virginia, which is a spitting distance from me, pretty much. And we go to Harper's Ferry. I mean, I've been to Harper's Ferry many times in my life. I'm not gonna say we go there frequently, but I have been there many times. And also I think of the glassmaking industry, which was a prominent industry in West Virginia up until fairly recently. Also, I just want to say that West Virginia is known for their kissing kin and for intermarriage in families. It's the joke. I'm not sure how much of that is actually statistically true, but I think it is. Anyways, that's kind of the joke. So the book that I thought of was Mansfield Park, which is one of the more famous classics that features a relationship between cousins and first cousins, and they end up getting married in that book. But another recommendation I want to make is The Lost Melody, because in one of the areas in West Virginia that I have been to a couple of times, more than once, is Weston, West Virginia. And there they have the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, I think is what it was called, which was a mental hospital for a long time in West Virginia, and fascinating place. A private family has bought it and is very, very slowly refurbishing it. And you can go there and take tours of the areas that they have refurbished, and they have like ghost tours and stuff if you like that kind of thing. It's definitely a very spooky place. Very spooky. Creepy as all get out. Yeah, but it's fun to go. So The Lost Melody by Joanna Davidson Politano is set largely in an insane asylum during the same time period where that one was active in West Virginia. Now, I believe that one was in Europe, not in America, but same idea. And it gave me those vibes when I was reading it, that I had gotten going to that insane asylum in West Virginia. So then number 17 is California. And California has a lot going for it, to be honest. It's got the Redwood Forest. San Diego, a long time ago I went there and I really loved that city. I don't know if I would love it as much now, but I loved it a long time ago. San Francisco, and the Golden Gate Bridge. The book I want to recommend for California is a book set in California, and that is The Masterpiece by Francine Rivers. And I think several of her books are set in California, but this one is one of her more recent ones, and it's just a really beautiful story of redemption and in a variety of ways, and it's just really good. It was a really good story, really well written and very compelling, and I really enjoyed it. And then number 16 is Texas. Texas is like a whole country all by itself. There's so much variety. My favorite part of Texas is San Antonio, but I haven't been there in a long time, so I really want to go back to San Antonio and make some more memories there as an adult. But when I think of Texas, I think of the vast variety of, like, it's a country into itself, and it has all the different kinds of terrain and climate and all that stuff. So I think of a book with multiple genres. The one I've read most recently is Paradise Lost, which I've talked about before, how it's an epic poem, but there are sci-fi elements of such as they are, not modern sci-fi, but definitely touching on that aspect of things. Travel through space, etc., that kind of stuff. There's a romance in there between Adam and Eve, and it's got all that kind of stuff. There's a bit of fantastical elements with fantastical creatures and that kind of stuff. So very genre bending, even though it's, mostly considered just a epic poem. There's got a lot going there. Then number 15 is Oregon. The Oregon coast is absolutely gorgeous, and I have only driven down it once, but I just was blown away by the breathtaking beauty of it, and so I would love to drive down it again. For Oregon recommendations, I have a couple. So first of all She Left Behind by Jane Kirkpatrick was honestly a little bit dry, but there was a lot that I loved about it, and it was very well written. And it was about a real woman who lived in Oregon in the early 20th century, late 19th century, and was one of the first female doctors. I don't know if it was in Oregon or in the whole country, but it's also a story of, there's issues with alcoholism and substance addiction, not on the part of her, but on people that she loved and was taking care of. And so it's a really heavy story. It was hard to read, and so because of that, I've had a hard time picking up any other books by Jane Kirkpatrick, but she has several books set in historic Oregon that I do want to read. You just have to be prepared for heaviness, I think, and a little bit dry. Like, it's kind of like Jennifer Ciavarini in that way. Like, they're biographical novels, but they are very heavy on the biographical aspect, I guess, to a certain extent. I also did not realize that Beverly Cleary was from Oregon, and so all of her children's books, I believe, are actually set in Oregon. I did not know that, but I recommended that for another state. So, but there's that. And then the other book that I wanted to mention was The Lines Between Us by Amy Lynn Green, which I have forgotten was also set in Oregon, which was fascinating because I did not realize until I read this book how close World War II came to the United States and to Oregon. So that was very interesting in that respect. There were some things, again, about the book that I didn't love, but overall, I have really enjoyed all of Amy Lynn Green's books and the perspective that she brings to World War II, which is a unique and fresh perspective, I think, especially in Christian fiction. So I can recommend that one. So those are my recommendations for Oregon. Number 14, Missouri. Now, I have family in Missouri. My parents live in Missouri now, and we have made some really good memories in Missouri. So that's mostly why I have Missouri here. We have been to the St. Louis Arch. We have been to Branson, Missouri, which is a fun vacation place, kind of along the lines of Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, that kind of area. Big Spring in Missouri is absolutely gorgeous. The color of the water there is amazing. Love that. Independence, Missouri is interesting. That's where many of the pioneers kind of started their wagon train trek out further west. And then the Laura Ingalls Wilder site that is in Missouri is also amazing. So there are a lot of really fun places to see in Missouri, which is why it makes it so high on my list here. And I have a couple of recommendations. One is Fathers and Sons by Yvonne Turgenev, only because I read that one time when we were visiting my parents, and for some reason that stuck out to me. I associate reading Fathers and Sons while I was visiting my father. I don't know. Just one of those connections my brain made that won't go away. So Fathers and Sons by Yvonne Turgenev, which is not a very long book, but it's very profound. And actually, Reading Ideas recently posted an excellent video with his analysis of it that I really enjoyed watching. So I will try to remember to link to his video about that. And then Orphan Train Adventures by Joan Lowry Nixon. I read when I was younger, and I love them. It's a series of 4 books, and it's about a family that was set on the orphan train, and they all ended up in Missouri with different families. And it's the story of each of them. Really fun middle grade books. Then number 13 would be Wyoming. In Wyoming in particular, I remember the Grand Tetons and Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is probably one of the most beautiful places I've been to in the world by far. And it's kind of far away from everything. So the book recommendation I have for that is Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. You can't get much farther from the crowd than Wyoming. Number 12 is Colorado. Also has some of the most beautiful places in the United States. I particularly remember, and this is appropriate for the time that it is now when I'm filming this and sharing this video with everyone, I particularly remember the Olympic Plaza, and I forget what it's called, but the USAA Olympic headquarters or whatever is there in Denver, Colorado. And we went and toured there when I was a teenager, and it was fascinating. really the only sport that I have ever personally followed that I have like really loved and been a fan of is ice skating. So I live for the Winter Olympics, and especially ice skating. Summer Olympics are fun, but I really love the Winter Olympics. So my book recommendations are The Heart of a Champion by Michelle Kwan, who is the greatest single female skater ever. Don't even argue with me on that because you're wrong. Anyways, she wrote an autobiography, which I read a long time ago, and it was very good, as autobiographies go, of someone who writes them in their mid-20s when they haven't really lived very much life. You know, but actually she had lived a lot of life for herself, for a person of her age. So, and it's, you know, all about her journey as an athlete and her struggles and successes, etc. And also My Sergei, A Love Story by Katerina Gordieva, which is the story of Gordieva and Grinkov, who were Russian Olympic pair skaters and very famous back in my day. And he died tragically. And so it's the story of their life together. And then number 11 is Idaho. Green hills and the Palouse are mostly what I think of when I think of Idaho. And I kind of sort of think of it, and this is probably wrong, but I kind of think of it myself as like the South up north. It's like the most southern northern state, northwest state especially. And I have enjoyed the time that I have spent in Idaho. In particular, I spent 3 summers in a row in Idaho taking some training to be a Kodai music teacher. And so my book recommendation also comes from a friend who lives in Idaho, and that is A Year of Wonder, which was given to me by Dia. And it is about, it's like a daily selection of classical music and a brief explanation of it and insight into the music so that you can enjoy listening to classical music throughout the year. And so that makes me think fondly of Idaho. Number 10 is North Carolina, which is the border state with Virginia. So I've been there quite a bit. My husband and I went to Biltmore on our honeymoon, and so we have fond memories. And we also went there for our 15th anniversary, I think it was. So we have fond memories of Biltmore and Asheville. Also, when on our honeymoon, so guys, girls, single girls, find a guy like this, okay? We watched, and this was my husband's idea because he knew how much I love Pride and Prejudice. We watched the 1995 Pride and Prejudice on our honeymoon. Yes, and so we both have fond memories of that, actually. Pride and Prejudice, that is my recommendation for North Carolina. Has nothing to do with North Carolina except that we watched the movie on our honeymoon. So, and that was in North Carolina. And then number 9 is Tennessee. Tennessee has the Smoky Mountains, of course, and Nashville, which is it's a fun city to visit. Dollywood is one of my family's favorite places to go in Tennessee. It's one of my favorite amusement parks. I don't normally love amusement parks, but I do like Dollywood. And Tamara, what is her last name? Tamara, can't think of it. Tamara Alexander is a Christian author who has written multiple books set in Tennessee based on actual places and people in Tennessee, but kind of, but still like historical fiction. So not biographical necessarily, but very well written, enjoyable books. Her Belmont Mansion series is one in particular that I would recommend, and the Belmont Mansion we have gone to in Nashville, Tennessee. And it's a lot of fun to visit those places after you read the books and see them in real life, the places that she was talking about in those stories. Number 8 is Massachusetts, which me and my family went to earlier this year. Had so much fun in Boston. There's so much history in Boston. Also, we didn't go to Plymouth this time. When I was young, we went to Plymouth. I have fantastic memories of going to Plymouth and the historic settlement that they have there, and just the beauty of Massachusetts, and also its literary impact on the developing country of the United States of America at the time. So my book recommendation is Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, and something about why it matters, why it still matters, which explores the effect of Louisa May Alcott's book Little Women on American culture and why it is still an important, impactful book in our culture today, why people still love it, and a little bit about Louisa May Alcott herself, who of course is from Boston, Massachusetts. And then number 7 is New York. And when I think New York, I think of Broadway. Also Niagara Falls, because I've been there a couple of times, but mostly I think of Broadway in New York, and I think of going to see a show in New York City. So the first book I want to recommend is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, because that is absolutely my favorite musical of all time. Has nothing to do with New York, except that Les Miserables was a long-running Broadway show there. Another recommendation is All of a Kind Family. I forget the name of the author, but it is a series of books, middle grade, turn of the 20th century family, 5 girls, I think. Jewish family, and they lived in New York City, and it's just the story of them kind of coming of age and the things they experienced, and it's just a fascinating glimpse into that slice of life there in New York City at that time, and I really enjoyed it as a child. Number 6 is Michigan. I have a lot of family history in Michigan. My mom and my dad are from Michigan. My mom is from the Upper Peninsula, and I have a lot of relatives still there. And I love the Finnish heritage that is still evident in Michigan today, to this day. The Upper Peninsula, they have saunas there. Yes, it's called saunas. They have pasties, which is they actually started in Cornwall, England, but I'm not exactly sure the etymology, but they became a staple of the Finnish diet in Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and they're quite delicious. So The Summer Book by Tove Jansson is a book I recommend because it's not set in Michigan, but it's set in Finland, in an island in Finland, and it's all about a summer on this island in Finland with a girl and her grandmother, and it's little vignettes of life there, and it's really beautiful. Number 5 is Florida. Again, my grandparents lived in Florida for a while when they retired. My sister currently lives in Florida. I've been to Florida many times. I've been to the Jacksonville area, the Leesburg area, the Orlando area. I've been to Miami area. I have been to the Keys. We've been to the Treasure Coast, I think it's called. The only place I haven't been to Florida yet that I really want to go is Naples, Florida. So that's on my list. But Florida, I've been there a lot. St. Augustine is beautiful. Love it. My sister's taken me there several times. Love that. I've been deep sea fishing in Florida, which is fun. So much about Florida that I love. I'm not sure that I would love living there, but there's a lot about Florida that I love. And then Their Eyes Were Watching God is my book by Zora Neale Hurston, is my book recommendation. I just read that recently, and it's set in Florida. I don't remember the exact time frame. Late 19th, early 20th century. It's 20th century. Yeah. It's mid 20th century. And it's about a black community in Florida, and primarily focused on the main character. Oh my goodness, I forget her name. But anyways, about the main character and her life story and the love in her life and the things that she went through trying to achieve her own independence. So that was a really good book that I enjoyed, set in Florida. Then Maryland is state number 4. We're getting close to the top. Maryland is where most of my childhood took place. So I have very fond memories. I had an almost idyllic 80s childhood in rural Westminster, Maryland, and so many fond memories of the people that lived there, my childhood friends, and the things that we did. There's an ice cream store in Westminster, Maryland called Hoffman's that is famous for their ice cream cakes, which I was the first person in my family to have an ice cream cake for my birthday, because we moved there the day before my 3rd birthday. And my mom, we were surrounded with boxes, and my mom was not able to make a cake like she normally does, and someone recommended Hoffman's to her, so she bought the ice cream cake. It was amazing. We still love ice cream cakes to this day. We occasionally still, it's a little over an hour drive from here, but we have bought ice cream cakes there from them for birthday celebrations here. They travel well if you put them in a cooler bag with ice and everything. So I want to share one of my favorite childhood books that I read in Westminster, Maryland. I could see myself on my bed there in my bedroom reading and dying laughing at Beverly Cleary's books. Loved Beezus and Ramona and all of the books about them and their family. I didn't read as much of her other books, but definitely all the ones about Beezus and Ramona I loved. I thought Ramona was hilarious. And my kids don't like funny books. They're weird. They're very, very strange. I don't know. They don't like funny books, so they didn't like the Moffatts. They didn't like Beezus and Ramona, whatever. I thought they were hilarious. Some of my favorite books from childhood. And number 3, my home state of Virginia. I love Virginia. I love all of the history in Virginia, the historic sites, the historic homes, the historic little towns. I live in a historic little town that's a colonial era town. I love how Virginia has some of the southern feel. It's not quite a Yankee state, but it's not fully south either until you get below Northern Virginia, and then it's south. I love the green hills. I love the forests. I love the Shenandoah Valley and the Shenandoah River. I love the beaches when you go to the other side. I love historic Williamsburg. All of it. I love it. We go to Williamsburg quite a bit in Virginia. And so the series I want to recommend is a series by Elspeth Thane, which I read when I was much younger. I think it's probably classified as, it's like a vintage young adult series. It's the Williamsburg series, and she has quite a few books set in and around Williamsburg during the time of the Revolutionary War. The first one is Dawn's Early Light. Now, there's a caveat here. Not everybody likes this book, and there's good reason. So if it doesn't sound like something you would like, maybe skip that and go to the other books. I think you could read the other books in the series without having to read this one. But in this first book, there is a romance that develops, and there's a distinct age difference between the two characters. And at the beginning of the story, the girl in question is a child. Now, there is not At least not that I collected. I didn't see it. I read it again as an adult, and I didn't see it then. So you may see it. Depends on your perspective. But there's not any kind of like relationship development or grooming or anything. It's one of those things where they know each other their whole life, but then, you know, time passes, and then all of a sudden, you know, he realizes that she is a grown woman, and then they just, you know, just through the circumstances, they're put on like kind of equal footing as adults now, whereas before, you know, she had been a child or whatever. So anyway, there's that. Fair warning, if that doesn't sound like it would interest you, I totally get it, but I think the author, Elspeth Thain, is worth looking into as a vintage author and of writing historical fiction. And also, I think her books are worth reading. So check her out. And then this really, spots 1 and 2 are really interchangeable. Actually, all 3 of these spots, these top 3 spots, Virginia holds a special place in my heart because it's my home and I love it. I love Virginia. But I do love these other 2 states to visit. And I could see myself living there possibly if I could afford it. So number 2, but it could be number 1, is Hawaii. My husband and I went there for a trip a few years ago. It was our consolation for not going to England. We wanted to go to Bath, England, and also Paris. And we were not able to because that was in March of 2020, and we all know what happened in March of 2020. Or in March of 2020, we had the trip all booked. So when we finally got our refunded tickets for our plane travel, we used them instead to go to Hawaii. And so, because at that time it was still difficult to travel overseas anywhere because of the various restrictions, so we just went to Hawaii. And it was amazing. It was amazing. We went to Oahu and I loved it. It's colorful, tropical, the color of the ocean water, the flowers, the hikes that we took, and the views that we had on those hikes. It was like the ultimate vacation life. It was amazing. A book that I read on that trip is The Paid Bridesmaid by Soraya Wilson. Now, I have since read books by Soraya Wilson that kind of made me roll my eyes, and one of them I couldn't even finish because it was so cheesy. So it may be that it was just like a situation of right time and right place for me, but I loved The Paid Bridesmaid. It was set in Hawaii, so I read it on the plane going there, and it was a fun read. I was laughing. I think I probably embarrassed my husband a little bit because I was laughing so hard in the plane. I couldn't help it. It was so funny. But it was also a great romance. It was a great vacation read. It was just fun. It was a fun read and I enjoyed it. And then Alaska, we went to last year, and Alaska, oh my goodness. Alaska is kind of like a frozen Hawaii. It's just expansive and it's beautiful, and oh my goodness, it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous state. And you can see for miles without seeing any influence of humans anywhere. It's just nature. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful nature. I don't have words to describe how beautiful it was. So I have quite a few book recommendations that are related to Alaska that I read last year on the trip. And one is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. Now, Kristen Hanna, she's a little melodramatic for me, to be honest. I don't love her writing style because there's a tendency towards the soap opera-esque in her books. And The Great Alone is no different than that. But it was compelling enough that I wanted to read through it all. And also, the setting of Alaska is very strong in that book. And so if you really want to get a feel for what life was like in Alaska in the 60s, it really was like a frontier. Like we think of pioneers as being in the 1800s in the Western United States, but in the 60s, that's what Alaska was like. And they were building a life from scratch there. And there's also family drama and emotional trauma and all of this stuff. So interesting book. Okay. Something just bumped into me. Okay. And then I discovered the poet Robert Service, who wrote in the early 20th century. He was writing poetry about the Yukon at large, not just Alaska, but that whole area in Canada as well. And just really, some of his poetry was just funny, kind of like ballads that were telling stories, a little bit cheeky. Some of them were just really beautiful. Some of them were sad, but all very accessible. I really enjoyed his poetry. And then another book, If You Lived Here, I'd Know Your Name. I cannot remember the name of the author, but she wrote obituaries and other things, I think, for a local paper in Alaska. When she and her husband moved to Alaska. And so she's written a couple books about culture in Alaska and kind of sort of like memoirs, or they're not really travel books, but they sort of are because they really give you a flavor of life in Alaska. And so if you want to know what life is like she was more near Juneau. She wasn't in Juneau, but she was more in that area, which I did not go to, but it was still a very fascinating look into life and culture in Alaska. And then also, this is interesting, but my sisters and I, as we were driving through Alaska, we started in Anchorage, but then we drove up to Fairfax, and then we drove down to, where did we go? I forget. But anyways, we did a lot of driving. And so we listened to Jimmy Stewart, Bomber Pilot, on audio. And it was a fascinating story of Jimmy Stewart, the actor, but his service in World War II. And I just came away with a great amount of respect for him as an individual and as a person. And I don't say that about very many people from Hollywood, but he was a very interesting person. That is my list of recommendations for books related to Alaska. And those are my states and the rankings of my book recommendations for them. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, where you would rank the states. What's your favorite state? How many states have you been to? What is your least favorite state? Do you agree with my rankings? Disagree? That's fine. I expect people would probably disagree with quite a few of my rankings. It's a very personal thing, right? And also book recommendations, if you have any thoughts about that, or if you have any book recommendations of books that are set in your state or one of your favorite states, let us know. I know when I was compiling my list here, and I was looking up books set in different states, I found so many books that I wanted to read that I haven't read yet, added to my TBR quite a bit. But let us know in the comments if there are some books you particularly recommend set in your state or your favorite state. And I look forward to reading through all your comments and chatting with you in the comments below. And for now, I'll say goodbye.